Call a member for Solomon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on a matter of public importance, the urgent need for the government to revoke the live cattle export ban. Now, as I stand before you today, not only are our farmers suffering, but thousands of cattle are starving in stockyards across Northern Australia. I refer to an article dated the 29th of June in the Northern Territory News where it said cattle have to be shot. And I'd like to quote a few words from this article. The live export ban means 8,000 Brahmins will have to be shot before they die of thirst, a shell-shocked Māori rancher, daughter of Northern Territory cattle icon Sarah Henderson said last night. She said water was drying up and the Bullo River Station dynasty has run out of cash to buy diesel to run the bores. We can't pump water for them. We have to start shooting them. I can't watch them die of thirst. It's a disaster beyond comprehension. Now, I actually thought we lived in a democracy. Not only have the government not looked after the welfare of the people, they have not considered the welfare of millions of cattle. I don't know what we're going to do. Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, that was a week ago, and the Gillard Labor government continues with what we can only describe as an economical, human and animal welfare disaster happening right before our eyes. These now starving and thirsty cattle were stopped from being exported because of a knee-jerk reaction by a panicked Gillard Labor government. The result, an animal welfare issue in our own country. I've been asked by the people of my electorate in Solomon and the Greater Northern Territory to tell you today that this total ban on live export is damaging. It is damaging to families, businesses, Indigenous and non-Indigenous jobs, the greater community and the welfare of our cattle. This total ban must be lifted as soon as possible. Mr Deputy Speaker, I stand before you today as a concerned Member of Parliament and a lifetime Territorian through and through. No one can deny that animal cruelty is wrong, but a blanket ban on live export is disastrous for Northern Australia and will not stop the cruelty inflicted from animals exported from our countries into these rogue abattoirs.
That's right.
Blanket banning Australian animals from being exported to Indonesia will not stop the cruelty. Let me make this very clear, Mr Deputy Speaker. Australian cattle farmers are appalled by the treatment of their cattle. They are appalled by these rogue abattoirs. This Gillard Labor government should resume the livestock trade immediately and trade with the abattoirs that comply with best international standards. The rogue abattoirs will have two choices, either meet the international standards or lose their business. Now, if we turn our backs on the trade, we lose our position to negotiate, to resolve the issue and stop the cruelty. Cattle production is worth around $300 million a year to the Territory economy. The live trade to Indonesia represents a massive 47% of our total live cattle trade. 47%. Mr Deputy Speaker, the total ban directly impacts cattle producers and business such as the transport or the trucking industry, farming families, feed suppliers. The ban also indirectly affects accountants who do the books for the cattle producers, the fuel suppliers and so on. Now, I was recently on Pete Davies' radio station 360, and during the show we received so many outraged calls from Territorians who were not happy, and they were not happy about the total ban. Most of them were not farming families. They were people who know that they'll be indirectly affected by this total ban. Mr Deputy Speaker, these people were not happy because they know that not only is it impacting farmers and the Northern Territory economy, but it won't stop the cruelty. This total ban is going to hit all of the Territory and it's going to hit it hard. Around 10,000 Territorians, including 700 Indigenous Australians, are being directly and indirectly affected. And Mr Deputy Speaker, there are an estimated 54 Indigenous cattle properties in the Territory. All of them will be affected or are affected. They, like the other businesses in the Territory, face an uncertain future. The damage to the Australian industry will be vast and difficult to recover from. As one of my constituents said to me last week, the cruelty seen in Indonesia is now being dealt out to our farming families of Northern Australia. And how true is that? Their livelihood is about to die as cruelly as the cattle in Indonesia. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, the constituent who said this to me is not alone and he's not wrong. Now, my office has also been inundated with calls and emails and letters from people from all over Australia and mainly the Territory. Most of them are fearful and angry about this total ban, particularly the implication that it will have on them and the Northern Territory economy. This issue needs to be resolved in a matter of days, not weeks, not months. This industry is at risk and so is the Northern Territory economy. Now, in another recent article in the Northern Territory News, it read cattle catastrophe coming down. Don't penalise us for rogue abattoirs. The article focuses on the Muldoon family that runs 40,000 head of cattle in the Territory. Mrs Muldoon said in the article, the government has made a serious misjudgment here. They made a really bad call on this. True. Like many of the 300 plus cattle farming families in the Territory will lose their income and may have to foreclose on their mortgages. This is simply unacceptable. Now, the Northern Territory Cattlemen's Association know full well live export trade is not something you can just turn on and off when it suits you, and they know the impact it has on the local and greater community. This is their industry, it is their livelihood, but unlike Labor, they are looking at what is in the best interest of the farmers and the best interest of the cattle. Luke Bowen from the Northern Territory Cattlemen's Association summed it up when he said, your government tried to turn the power off at the wall, and do you now expect to just switch it back on at a time when it suits and expect the cattle to be on boats in the next day? It takes weeks for the supply chain in Australia alone to start to move again from the property to the port. Get off your hands and show some commitment and try and resolve and fix what you broke before the North implodes. Mr Deputy Speaker, I am not convinced that this government cares about Territorians, especially those Territorians who will be affected by this total ban, nor do I think they care about the thousands of cattle starving and dying of thirst. Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, I care, and I want my colleagues in this place to know that this Gillard Labor government, through its failure to competently administer Australia's live cattle export industry, has put serious pressure on Northern Australian families. So desperate to get the message to the government, a constituent of mine has started a Territory-wide petition urging the Gillard Labor government to stop the cruelty, not the trade. Now, I'll be tabling that petition when the next sitting period. The Northern Territory Legislative Assembly was specifically recalled early to discuss this total ban and the impact on Territory families. Now, unlike the Gillard Labor government, the federal and Territory country Liberals have flown to Indonesia to try and find a way to resolve this issue. We, the Coalition, believe that there are ways to ban the cruelty and not stop the trade. The point that seems to be missed in this debate is that there are internationally accredited abattoirs in Indonesia. Why aren't we exporting to them? This is why the Gillard Labor government should lift the export ban. Unlike the Gillard Labor government, the Territory Labor Party has used its common sense to realise that the decision of the Gillard Labor government was wrong, was rushed, not thought out, and arrogant and ignorant. Now, like many Territorians, I'm sick and tired of this Gillard Labor government's knee-jerk reactions to issues as important as this. This total ban on live exports is another example of the government making decisions that affect our country without considering the short and long-term implications across our nation. As a federal representative from the Northern Territory, I have a question to those opposite on behalf of the people of the Northern Territory. Why isn't the Labor member for Lingiari representing the people on this issue? Or why hasn't Senator Trish Crossan voiced her people's concerns? Why are they silent on this issue when the people of the Northern Territory who elected them are calling on them to speak up? I call on the member for Lingiari and Senator Crossan to join myself and Senator Scullion and represent the people of the Northern Territory by calling on the Gillard Labor government to revoke the ban on the live cattle exports. Liberal colleague Senator Scullion and I are certainly being vocal on this issue. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, the issue here is obvious. Animal cruelty, yep, it is wrong. The issue is not trading live export overseas. The implications of this ban stretch far beyond the property lines of Australian cattle stations. The Gillard Labor government needs to open its eyes, look at the bigger picture, admit you got it wrong, fix the cruelty, and save the trade.
Here.